Excited to welcome Christopher Newport head coach John Krikorian to the basketball podcast. Krikorian led Christopher Newport to remarkable success, including its first three Final Four appearances and its first national championship in the 2023 season. Krikorian has led the captains to 9 NCAA tournaments in 12 seasons, including the last 7 tournaments. Christopher Newport is the only school in the nation to win at least one game in each of the last 7 NCAA tourneys, and Krikorian now has a career mark in the tournament of 23-7. His overall record at Christopher Newport is 290-65 for an 80% winning percentage through his first dozen years at the helm. He was named the National Coach of the Year by the NABC following his national title in 2023. Krikorian's teams at Christopher Newport have won at least 18 games per season since he took over and advanced to the conference championship game every year for the last 9 seasons in the Capital and Coast to Coast Athletic Conference. The national championship team of 2022-23 tied the school record for victories with 30, finishing 30-3 and ending the year on a 15-game winning streak. Krikorian's coaching resume now includes 6 seasons as an NCAA Division I assistant and 16 as a Division III head coach. His overall head coaching record is 355-107. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me.
Excited to talk to you. Wow, incredible success throughout your career, especially at Christopher Newport and the national championship. Talk to us about that.
You know, it at this point feels like a lifetime ago a little bit, but your whole career, you're striving towards that one, peak, and to be able to actually arrive there and succeed as a coach. That's a pretty incredible feeling. You just have great appreciation for how many people have tried, how many great coaches have been close and not been able to get over that hump, and to be one of them it's humbling, honestly. But it's much more of a celebration for the 50 plus years of basketball at Christopher Newport, and we've had great players and coaches here. We have a great school and community, and I think that the groundwork was laid for that championship long before we assembled last year's team, and those guys got to take us to the final step. But it's been a lot of work for a lot of people over a long period of time to get there, and yeah, what they tell me, it's not something they can take away, so I'm holding on for dear life so that they can't.
Well, that's tremendous perspective, and certainly acknowledging all the people in the past that helped build it and contribute to it is a wonderful sentiment. And I asked you prior to this, just kind of because I like to dive a little deeper in terms of the success you've had. And I asked you, why are some things beyond the obvious, which is talent, that you have been successful with this program? And one of the first things you talked about is talent and character and passion for the game, competitive spirit. These things all go together a little bit. Can you connect that a little bit for us in terms of how that impacts your program?
Yeah, I think it's really evolved as early on in your career, everything is black and white, and players have to fit a certain mold. And there's certainly things that you're looking for. But for us, it's always been that trying to find that sweet spot of talent and character. Until just recently, really until the last year or two, never felt like we were just going to get the best players, right? Who in coaching really believes that they're just getting the best players? So, finding the best players that we could get, which was different in year 1 and 2 than it is now. And it was different at the Merchant Marine Academy than it is here. The best talent that we can get, but those with the character to improve, because it always felt like juniors and seniors are the ones that really carry your teams, and to have guys that evolve and develop and have the character to look at themselves when things aren't going well is a huge piece of the puzzle. And there'll be times maybe we'll pass on a talented player for someone with a little more character, or maybe we have very strong character in the program and we're going to take a risk on somebody who maybe needs some character development, but they're super talented. And just really trying to find that balance where we know we have a program and we're doing things the right way, and the guys are locked into being about the team, but then not being so strict about it that we aren't able to, bring along some guys maybe that could help our team, and they have the talent and they just need a family around them to help them grow up a little bit while they're there. So, it's a ebb and a flow, and some years you maybe have a little too much than the other, but I think certainly, right, assistant coaches I've had great ones. That's a huge part of our success. They are the ones that really go out and find the talent that we can recruit. And then at the end of the day, that's up to me to determine, is this young man and their family the right fit for this program, for what we're doing? Do they have the toughness? Do they care about the team enough to get them the growth necessary to be competitive nationally? And you never can go, oh, to win a national championship. No, but you just want to be in the conversation. You want to have a chance to be in that Elite Eight, Final Four, Sweet 16, because as we learned, anything can happen once you get there.
Course, and talent and character, certainly that goes a long way towards building team dynamics and culture. But particularly, I want you to talk about and explain a little bit more about what you mean about cliques and outliers.
Yeah, so well, cliques within a team. I think we're this is a family. You're coaching a group of young men anywhere from 18 to 23 years old. You have fifth-year seniors, you have freshmen, possibly some transfers. You have groups that came in together and they're super close. On our particular team this year, we have two sets of brothers, and we spend a lot of time really trying to make sure that we assimilate all of the players to feel like they have an equal role within the team, and really probably hyper vigilant about little groups forming that maybe end up being their own dynamic, which may be counter to being there for all the members of the team. And that happens naturally, and it happens behind the scenes sometimes. And it's something that we'll talk about as coaches, try to pick up on in meetings, try to pick up on where people are sitting when we go to eat dinner. So we'll do things like, we didn't invent the wheel. A lot of coaches do this, but on the road, we'll really try to pair maybe an older guy with a younger guy. We value diversity. It's one of our three core values. And so how we room the freshmen together, we might really try to get two guys from different backgrounds together so that different groups within our team can form. We might have point guards become their own little entity and create a little competitive deal with the wing players and for shooting percentage or something. But just as much as we can, really try to have every individual have the confidence to tell their teammates the truth and to hear the truth. Because as soon as you hide behind a group of people that are going to tell you what you want to hear, which can happen, to me, that's one of the biggest obstacles to success.
Well, I love that connection, to be able to make them comfortable enough to be able to share, what needs to be shared in the right way. And that's a tremendous connection. And you mentioned core values, and obviously many coaches have core values, and yours believe brotherhood and diversity, and you can talk about those. But more, I love the point that you revisit them every 3 to 4 years. So talk to us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, and I firmly believe it's about the process, not the words. If you take a list, there's probably 100 values you could choose from, and they're all great. And champions of all levels at all sports have different ones, and it's about the buy-in, I believe. So every 3 or 4 years, as we get a group in, and I think we're about to do it now because we have some really talented freshmen, we'll hopefully bring in another class behind them. And now I'll see a group of 10 or 12 that are going to be with us for 3 years. So it'll be the perfect time, probably next fall, to start the conversations of what do we want to be? What do we stand for? What is this group passionate about? And we'll go through and we'll have groups or individuals within the team present maybe values that they feel strongly about, they think can help our team. I'll have them study the most successful teams in history, or organizations. It might even be military organizations or business organizations, and present to the team. These are the values of the United States Army. These are the values of Nike. These are the values of Tennessee women's basketball. These are the values of the New England Patriots. And here's why these can really help our team if we buy in. And we'll put them all on the table, and we'll take weeks to kind of go through that, and it's theirs to own from that point on. And I think that process is much more important. So when those words are on the wall or on our practice plan, they mean something.
It's a great perspective to be able to approach it that way. And as you said, I mean, players change, but also the circumstances of what you're coaching and how you're coaching change quite a bit as well in this process. And I love this other connection that no team captains. And I've heard that from some other coaches before, in that sense that you're trying to empower everyone. Can you explain a little bit more your rationale behind that?
Yeah, it's probably been a decade since we've had one. And don't know exactly where I came to it, but there was definitely a moment where I decided I'm not doing that, because the last thing I want is for a freshman or sophomore or somebody who could really lead our team, could really make an impact, but instead chose to take a back seat because they didn't feel comfortable speaking up, or a selected person as a junior or senior who maybe was the wrong person, and on top of that, and this might have been what it was, is 10 years ago, we put a list together of all the requirements and responsibilities to be a team captain. And I think a coaching friend of mine had sent me a list. They were one that had their players apply to be a team captain. Some coaches do this and they have to send a resume and all these things. Well, the list that we came up with was like 25 long. And I thought to myself, how can one person or two people possibly be responsible for all these things and play basketball? And so for me, it was, we need everybody to be part of this process. And we've had vocal leaders, we've had leaders by example, we've had quiet leaders, behind the scenes leaders, bench leaders. And so it just felt like having every single player in the team have some responsibility for what happens on the court, and be empowered to lead and be empowered to speak up. And when we went to the Final Four 2019, it's a story that people talk about. We had a freshman who wasn't playing, and we were down, I think, 12 against Hamilton on the road in the Sweet 16. We were dead. We were done for. And I didn't go in the locker room. I told them they had to figure it out. And a freshman of all people that wasn't playing stepped up and really got into the guys and told them the truth that they didn't want to hear about the way that they were playing. And they responded like in no way that they would have responded to anybody else. And we came out, we ended up winning the game. And, I would hope that because of our culture, he felt confident to be able to speak and be heard, and to be respected, even though his role was not a prominent one. And to me, that's the power of having 15 guys who all have engagement, have some empowerment, have investment in the process, and can lead. And there's so many different ways to lead that's why I think our job as coaches and the ultimate leader, to empower them to find those opportunities and take them when they can.
I love that. And, are there some specific things within that you do to be able to make, say, some of the newcomers to your program more comfortable in that? Because again, there tends to be this stereotype of leadership is this chronological thing rather than this logical thing.
Yeah, it's more, I think, it's almost every day that it's revisiting and talking about, listen, anybody can lead. You have to speak up. And a lot of times that comes out for us on defense. I'm sure we're going to get to it. Defense is our bread and butter. And that's really where there's so many opportunities on the court to lead, to call somebody through a screen, to switch a screen, to come on the court and communicate with your teammates. Well, that requires everybody. If a freshman's playing, they have to be able to communicate pretty sternly, quickly, and honestly, or else the job's not going to get done. And so just our constantly talking about, hey, you got to speak up. Anybody can lead. It's an everyday part of our program.
I love it. And, we're in season while we're doing this, and I appreciate you taking some time in season. So maybe let's go there first, because I think in-game coaching and game philosophy and different things like that are super important and maybe don't get discussed enough on some of my podcasts. So I loved your philosophy that you shared with me, that there's always a way, you just have to find it. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's as simple as my uncle growing up. I grew up in a very competitive family. My mother grew up on a farm. She was one of 11 children. And so you can imagine, I mean, every Sunday, every family outing was some sort of competitive to the death match in whatever sport it was. And, my uncle, who's a terrific basketball player, coach, and ultimately a referee, was my mentor in basketball. And in coaching later on, he said, it's what he said. He said, there's always a way to win the game. You just got to figure it out. And it took me a lot of years to really understand that. And again, all things being equal, right? I mean, we're not going to go beat the Lakers tomorrow, no matter what I do. But within certain boundaries, I thought to myself, almost every time we lose a game, we sit in the office as coaches and say, oh, had we done that, we could have won the game. Had I done this, we could have won the game. Had we made that change, had we inserted this player, had we gone zone. And so really, rather than do it after the game, trying to figure that out before the and during the game. And can we find a way to win the game? And we were just up. We took our team to Penn, which is my alma mater, and Coach Donahue, who was my coach in college, spoke to the team, and he referenced Billy Donovan, who said it in a different way, but every game presents something different. And you don't know what it's going to be until you're playing that game. And you have to figure it out every night. You might think, hey, I'm going to go score 40 this game. You're the leading scorer, and you get there and they're double teaming you. You're not going to get 40 that game. You have to adjust to the game. Every game's different. And I think just really being open, one, being prepared, knowing your opponent, knowing plan A, B, and C, and what might happen, but then also being open to anything. And then being willing to take those risks, I think, is also a huge part. Well, how risk averse are you? If you're just going to do the same thing all the time, that's fine. There's some terrific teams, and they do it. They do what they do, and they're not going to change, and you're going to have to beat them at doing what they do. And I respect that. And there's a lot of things that we do that way. But then there's I think the creativity and openness to see the game as it's being played, and not be afraid to throw a guy in who maybe hasn't played a lot because you think the matchup is right, or do something really risky with a player on the other team who's hurting you, almost daring another player to beat you with open shots, or whatever the case may be. And that's the fun part of coaching. I mean, I really, really enjoy that. And I think we talked a little bit about how the simplicity of it is so important, and that adjustments, to me, in game, they're fun if they're simple and the players can apply them without having to second guess themselves or think or slow down, but that they can just react. It's as simple as, hey, don't let that dude catch the ball. We don't have a fancy terminology. We don't have, 5 guys running some sort of thing. Like, hey, Chris Oliver is killing us. Who's going to be the guy that's not going to let him catch the ball? And you look in the huddle and there's a guy that says, Coach, I got it. And you go with it sometimes. And it doesn't have to be complicated.
I love that. And I hope someday I do kill someone again on the floor, but I think those days are gone. But Coach, you mentioned the research, the preparation in terms of some of this risk and risk tolerance and applying some of these risky things. How much of it in your mind now at this point in your career is feel versus something you've dove into in terms of the analytics, the research, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've always considered myself a numbers guy. I was a systems engineer. I was doing points per possession since the day I got into coaching.
I meant to ask you, are you the only systems engineer in the history that has won a national championship?
I don't know.
Maybe.
About that, it's a fun thing to say, but I didn't. My daughter needs my help in trigonometry right now, and the fact that I can't remember a thing about it is embarrassing. But anyway, so I've always been an analytical guy. We've been doing points per possession since I got into coaching, like literally right when Ken Palm was getting started. I've always valued that because turnovers, rebounds, tempo, all that has to factor in a little bit. But I think nowadays it's gotten maybe even too much data. I think it's more about what you do with it and how you can apply it in a simple way. And I like to see it all and kind of know what's going on. But I think the value is how you can apply it to your team. And as you mentioned, the feel, I think the more games you coach and the more years you coach and the more players you coach, I do think it starts to lean a little more towards the field, because you can say, hey, I've played this game. We've played this game. We've played a team like this. I know this coach. I know his style. I know what they want to do. Despite what the numbers say, they're valuable. But when it comes to the last 3 minutes of the game, like, I know it's going to come down to X, Y, or Z. And analytics oftentimes can't really factor in for some of that stuff. But I really think it's that sweet spot of combination of data preparation, film study. I think talking with my staff is so important, talking through ideas before they happen. Well, what if they do this? Okay, give me another scenario. Tell me what else could happen. Well, what if they do this? And having all those if-then scenarios prior to the game. And I'll make them my assistants. If you work for me, they'll tell you, like, don't come to me with some idea, or don't challenge my idea without some data behind it, or without something. Don't just say, hey, well, I think we should do this. Well, tell me why. Well, it's because this team is 70% effective doing this. And okay, all right, you better be able to back it up. And then we'll work through that before the game. And I think it's that sweet spot combination between feel and data that I think we've been fairly successful at, but you can go one way or the other fast, and I think you got to try to get back to that middle ground.
With this game philosophy, what do you mean by, or maybe it's not worth it in order to make a point?
Oh yeah, so you have your standards, and you might see within the game like, hey, we would have to sell out to win this game, and that might mean it's November 10th, and I know that in order for us to be successful in March, we're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. I could lower the standard for this particular game, and maybe we could find a way to win it. But holding the standard high now and losing the game will help us more in March. And that might be having a player sit on the bench who's not meeting the standard. Oftentimes it's something like that. It might be not changing our defense, because I know that then my players will think, rather than provide the necessary effort to execute what is going to be needed in March, we'll just switch the defense. So that's what I mean by again, that, and we schedule hard, and early in the season, I don't mind. We might take some L's, and I think we learn a lot more from those losses than finding a way to win those games, yet hurting our team standards later in the year. Versus now, you get to the tournament, all bets are off. You are who you are. We'll roll the dice. We've done some wacky things in the NCAA tournament, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Well, I love it. And more often than not, lately it's worked for you. So it's a great perspective on it too. And I'm imagining this connects as well to, you talked about empowering your players as leaders. You're empowering them to make some in-game adjustments as well, aren't you?
We are. Matchups, they might come over to the huddle, and it just happened the other night, and one guy says, hey, listen, I think if I take this matchup, that'll, move him over to this guy, that would really help us. I said, go for it. Or, hey, I think we can, coach, like if they run this ball screen again, they're hurting us. Why don't we trap it this time, just one time, and see how it goes? And all right, go for it. I'd love for my team now to do a little more of that. We're still working towards that. Some of our earlier teams, 2016, 17, for instance, those guys owned it completely. I mean, they ran the whole thing. I just sat back, and it was a lot of fun. So when you have those teams and you have those players that really take ownership and do that, it's awesome.
It's great stuff. And a lot of this connects also to how you practice. And particularly, I've noticed through some of the things you've talked about in some of the different interviews, you definitely have a bit of a military influence, don't you, on your coaching and your philosophy. So maybe connect that for us in terms of the mental side, because that ties into game philosophy, practice philosophy. The mental side of the game is very important to you.
It is. So we use a philosophy, a quote I use all the time with the team is that with discipline comes freedom. And for us on the court, X's and O's wise, it's the discipline for us is on the defensive end of the floor. We're very detailed about it. We're very strict about certain things. We have a foundation series. We expect near perfection on the defensive end of the floor in terms of what we are going to do. But then with that on the offensive end, we don't. I'm not going to have them do that on both ends of the floor. On offense, we want to give them space. We want them to be creative. We want them to play with confidence. We want them to share the ball, but we're not going to require every detail in the way that their foot touches the line and their screen angle is perfect. And, I just don't think you can do that on both ends of the floor. So that's kind of our philosophy, is that with discipline on defense and rebounding comes the freedom on offense to go be the player that you want to be. And my job is just to kind of put you in spots in order to be successful. And in terms of the mental side, I mean, we shoot less than 60% from the free throw line. So I don't know that I'm any kind of expert. We're definitely feeling the heat this year as defending champions. But over the last 8 or so years, I've learned. I had a close friend who's just an expert in the field that understands like heart rate variability, and this stress performance curve, which is something that we value, I value. Probably haven't done enough of it with this team, but just that sweet spot of pushing your team to the heightened state of performance, but then knowing when you have to get out of that and recover, because you can't live in that state for 4 months. You'll crash and burn every time. So pushing them to the peak of that curve and then being able to come down. And, we can do that through mindfulness. We breathe, we do breathing exercises with our team. I do breathing exercises. And so I think I mentioned about our practice days. We're pretty intense. We don't put a time limit on it. I mean, we're going to go till we get it right, but we're only going to go 3 days in a row. Like, very rarely will we be on the court as a team more than 3 days in a row. And that would only be if we had a handful of games in a short period of time. But once we get in a rhythm, it'll be 3 days and a day off. It might be 2 days and a day off. But I think that that's really important for them to actively recover, get with athletic trainers, get with strength and conditioning, get their bodies and minds right so that they can play, fresh and confidently.
Well, I love this mind, body, spirit connection. And I think the challenge for coaches is really the practical way of applying it. So maybe first we'll start with the breathing practices. Can you give us an example of how you integrate it in terms of your practices and for your players?
Yeah. So the data through breathing, and so this all started with my friend Dr. Ron Garbo, and he's an expert in heart rate variability, among other things. And we were having to deal with burnout about 8 years ago, and retention, and maybe pushing myself and others just a little too far along that curve. He introduced me to something called heart math, because I was very resistant. I'm not a yoga guy. I'm not a meditation guy. I don't wear tight pants. I'm not a kumbaya guy. I didn't really understand it, but this was a very scientific way. And it gives you feedback that if you breathe 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out for a certain period of time, the goal is to practice that 5 to 10 minutes a day. You can really bring yourself down. And with this tool, you have an app on your phone and you can actually see it happen. It's really incredible. I don't know if you've ever used it, but you can do the breathing and you can see it changing your heart rate variability right in front of you, which is a measure of, this is what elite golfers, elites, Olympians, like, they're all doing this stuff. You see Steph Curry on the sideline breathing, but to me, you can't just say breathing. It's got to be purposeful. And this tool gives you some feedback, and it's just incredibly powerful. And so we'll do it now, the day of the games. It's as simple as, before we do our walkthrough, we'll kind of get in a room and we'll all lie on the floor and breathe, and just practice breathing 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out, which can seem like an eternity in the heat of battle. But if you understand how to do it, it's a very powerful way to kind of center yourself. And a lot of athletes do it naturally, right? You see a guy go to the free throw line, he takes a deep breath. Sometimes they don't even know why they're doing it, but there's a reason, and if you're purposeful about it and you can do that, it's a great way to kind of center yourself, to get in the zone, to perform at a higher level, to relieve that burnout situation of falling over the cliff. It's been incredibly helpful for my career in terms of balance. I've seen its impact on some of my players, and it's something I believe in. We at one point we were using the polar straps and measuring heart rate variability, and that was a really powerful indicator for our team. We could put it right up on the screen, and I probably need to go back and do more now since COVID. Probably need it more than ever now.
It's brilliant stuff. And I've been fortunate. My wife has exposed me to a lot of this heart math and, heart coherence and the different things that come from that. And it's brilliant stuff. And as you mentioned, I think the key part for coaches is it's all evidence-based science. It's not kumbaya, as you say. It's all well researched, and it's all makes sense, to be honest. And I've never actually heard a basketball coach explain it as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. And we know that connection, mind, body, spirit exists. And and also with that, of course, you push and challenge your players, and you're constantly getting them to try and be better. So talk to us a little bit about that balance. And at least we all think that you don't coach them hard.
Yeah, our absolute core standards and mantra is tough and together, and we break every huddle with those 2 words. It's every day. It's in the recruiting pitch, it's on the wall, it's everything for us. Is that mental and physical toughness in sport is number one, and we believe in it. and we require it, and it's just something that has been really successful for, I think, for our team, but also for our players as they move on from here. And then togetherness, and it's putting your teammates first. And again, the simplicity of it, I think, is its power. It's not a mission statement of 9,000 words to be memorized. It's not. It's that simple. It's toughness and togetherness, and it's the only awards that we have for our team. At the end of the year, every player and every coach gets one vote, and they vote for who the toughest player on the team was, mentally and physically, and they vote for who the best teammate was. And those are on the wall in our locker room. It's the only names you'll find on the wall in our locker room are those guys. And we've had guys that are on that wall that are all Americans, and we have guys on that wall you've never heard of. They're walk-ons, but their impact on the team, because we believe toughness and togetherness, they have nothing to do with ability, nothing to do with talent. It has everything to do with your attitude and your spirit. And that's the beauty of this game, is that you can impact winning without being the most talented player. And I think that the more of that you have, the more successful you'll be, as at least as a foundation. And then when you bring some talented players and lift them up on top of that, I think that's the pinnacle right there.
It's awesome stuff. I love that. And you've mentioned foundation a few times, and you mentioned foundation series. So we got to dive into that. Otherwise, I'm going to get some emails from coaches. So maybe, Coach, give us a broad overview of it first.
Yeah. So I can't, like anything, none of this is original, but Fletcher Arrett, Fork Union Military Academy, rest in peace. I played when he was coach. I was on the Penn JV team when he was at Fork Union. So I played against them, and we just connected at that point on. I got into coaching and coached against them, and I would go down and watch his teams practice, and I recruited his teams, and we ended up becoming really close. We'd talk on the phone. I'd go down and watch his practices, and you talk about running a military type style practice. His players would come on the court, and they would go through a series of defensive motions, and they were not allowed to speak to each other. There was no talking. You would just come up from the locker room, and you would start maybe your zigzag down the court, and then you might get into a defensive slide, and then and he had a series of movements that were just principles of their defense, and you couldn't talk, and there were no balls, and it was like, wow, this is some old school stuff, And so when I got into coaching, I did that, and I tried that for a year or two, but the talking thing, I just couldn't. It
that
just
would be hard, wouldn't it?
Happen. So we moved on from that, but the core is finding these things that we believe in defensively. We call them our foundation series. We do them regularly. We don't do them all every day, but we might take one or two each day because it might apply to our upcoming opponents, and we'll go through them. And it's before we stretch. It's not live. It's really just going through the techniques and reiterating how we're going to do it. And so it's how we're guarding screens. It's how we're stunting and recovering to the ball, helping and recovering. It's how we swivel our head on a back cut, how we front the post. So it's how we contest shots. For us, we call it championship contesting. Every shot we expect to contest as if it's the last shot of the game, and you're up one. So, I mean, there's about 8 of them, and we'll do 1 or 2 a day. And, they know what they're doing. They'll break up to each end, and they'll go through the motions, and, take 5 or 8 minutes, and just kind of mentally rehearse those movements.
And that's done before the beginning of formal practice?
Yeah, so we have a pre-practice.
Yeah.
We have a pre-practice which could last anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes, depending on the time of year and where we're at. And that'll consist of those types of drills. It'll consist of ball handling and passing drills. It'll consist of some 5-man weave or 3-man weave or something to get the juices flowing. It'll go into some dummy offense typically. It'll be all the stuff before we go live. And then we'll end that. We'll come together, and then it's kind of a shift. They'll stretch for 5 minutes. I don't even know that they need to, but it's as much about the mental, like, okay, something's going to change now. And so I've tried to get rid of it. I've had athletic trainers tell me to do it differently. I mean, but at the end of the day, this works for me. We get loose. We do a lot of running around and ball handling work, and then we stretch. And then when we come out of that, it's on. It's live. it's 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, whatever it is competitive and it's live for however long we're going to go that day. Shell drill, whatever we're doing, but it's going to be competitive. There's going to be a score kept. There's going to be a winner and a loser, and we're playing. And they know when they come out of that stretch, it's on. And I'd like to think our practices are enjoyable. They're hard. I think they get us ready though for games. And we're lucky when you're able to put two groups on the floor that are competitive. It really gets the juices flowing.
Great stuff. And I mean, you can connect this for us to a little bit of your overall defensive philosophy, which again couldn't be simpler. Figure out how your opponent wants to score and make them do something different. Yeah, I mean, just so simple, isn't it? And that comes back to a foundation too, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's I don't know if there's anything unique about that. I think all coaches do, but again, it's I think it's kind of like what you're willing to live with as a coach and what your players know you're willing to live with. But yeah, that's our job as coaches and players when we're scouting is, okay, what is this team really, what is the best thing this team does offensively? How do they want to score? And what are we going to do to not let them do that? I'm not saying we're going to win the game, but we're not going to let them do that. And then you're going to have to do something else. And to me, that makes teams uncomfortable. And there's times we do that, we lose the game. And you as the coach and the leader, you have to be able to look your team in the eye and say, listen, we did what we asked you to do, and they were good enough to go to plan B and beat us. And so we'll shake their hand and we'll get better. And here's a couple of things we could have learned. But is it about they're going to play through this one player? Maybe they have a point forward. And then we're going to say, well, you're not going to play through that one player this game. Is it that they are going to run these actions and they score half their points off of these actions? Well, we're not going to let you run those actions. We're going to find a way to take you out of those actions and make you one-on-one players. Are they going to spread the floor and throw it inside and spread you out? And that's, so whatever it is, we're going to do our damnedest to try to make sure you're not doing that. And then if you can find another way, then that's the fun part of coaching. And then we'll see what you do and we'll try to make another adjustment. But that's the really fun part of game coaching, is to see what they're going to do when you take them out of what they're comfortable doing.
You mentioned being less into adjustments on defense, but from what I gather from that statement and the way you explain it, it's not rigid. You're definitely very adjustable in terms of your defense within the foundations that you have. Is that a fair way to be able to explain it?
That's key, right? You have to believe in something, right? It's the old, if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. And you see this time and time again with teams who are changing their defenses all the time. Like, we know what we believe in and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And that's what I talked about, those early games. We're really not going to waver, even if it might help us win a game, because we need to have this standard of how we do things. This is what we stand for. But then we also have to understand that the best teams are going to use that against us. The best teams are going to know how to use the way that we use screens or we defend screens and try to counter it. There's going to be some players that don't fit the mold of our defense. Like, we can't stay in front of them, so we have to have a great player adjustment defense, and we have those. So yeah, it gets kind of to a certain point in the year where we feel our foundation is strong, that we can then say, all right, we're going to make this adjustment, and then we don't feel like it's going to throw the whole thing out the window. And I think that's so important, because if you do it too early, if it's November 10th and you're saying, hey, all right, we got to switch every screen now all the time, you're never going to be able to get them back to not switching screens. They're going to take the easy way out for the rest of the year. And so I think that's for us, again, making sure our core is solid and strong. And then within that, building in the adjustments. And that's why, people ask about how we guard ball screens, drop coverage. A lot of that is because the adjustments are so simple. We're in drop coverage. We can push you to the screen. We can ice the screen. We can force you to your weak hand. And we're always going to have the help of the big. So, like, we can do a number of different things just within the drop coverage, and that applies to a stagger screen. That applies to a pin down. So there's the way we're going to do it. And then the adjustments typically are fairly well thought out and easy. and especially in the game. And that's the beauty of it. If I'm trailing a guy off a stagger and he keeps beating me, and I come to the timeout and I tell him, okay, hey, you know what? Just cheat underneath it or just switch out. Well, they're all ears now because they've just gotten beat for 8 straight points. So they're going to adjust very quickly because we all see what's going on. But I guess, I think that answers your question, is the foundation first and then the simple adjustments within that later.
Well, the drop coverage example obviously brings it home even more. And so that would be your base teaching, would be drop coverage. And then from there, at what point do you start to introduce some of the potential changes that can be made within that?
Once we get in, you get into the rhythm of games. And so
are they more, I should ask that, are they more game driven changes?
They're more game, right? So we're
Okay.
going to spend the 2 days prior to a game preparing for that game, knowing at least with the team, plan A, plan B, and then I and the coaches might have plan C. But, okay, here's what we're doing, plan A. If we have to, we might consider this plan B. And usually by the time you're 15 games in, you've seen so many different things and you've now made so many different adjustments, you can call them back. And that's the beauty of it later in the year. And maybe this is why the postseason's been good to us, because by the time we get there, we're able to say, hey, listen, we just saw this 2 weeks ago. It's the same action. Okay. You remember what we did then? Yeah. We hedged out early and went under the second one or whatever, Oh yeah, I got you, coach. All right, boom. We just did it. We've seen it. To me, that's more effective than it's Division III. We don't have the summer and the fall and individual workouts and all. I can't possibly introduce 35 different ways to defend the screen every day in practice for the 20 practices I get, right? So we kind of use the days before the games to work on the adjustments. And then by the second half of the year, we've probably seen most of the adjustments that we're ever going to need to make.
I love it. I mean, I say it about skill that adaptability is more important than repeatability, but I believe that applies to what you're saying in terms of your postseason success. Is ultimately so much of that has to do with your ability to be able to adapt rather than repeat just solutions that you've learned all year. And thank you. I mean, you really highlighted that for us. And yeah, we've talked about defense, we've talked about practice, philosophy, all those different things. So let's connect it a little bit in terms of offensive philosophy. And you already referred to the freedom that players have. What is the biggest part for you in terms of giving them freedom?
Sharing the ball. It's decision making and sharing the ball. I'm not a set coach. Like I said, I'm not rigid. I don't see the game that way offensively. I don't want to be the coach that's taken out of what I want to do by a defense that is like the one I would want to have, right? So, and my own team teaches me that every day. I try to put in a play on offense in practice, and the defense takes us out of it. And I'm thinking to myself, why the heck did I even bother doing that? Because any good defense is going to disrupt and force you into counters and counters to counters and counters to counters to counters. Why not just teach them how to play basketball? Teach them how to play in space, teach them how to read the defense, and then reward good decisions and have consequences for poor ones. And, a lot of this comes from Fran Dunphy, who is, a huge mentor. He used to keep it as simple as make shots, make plays. Take the right shots, knock them down, and make the right plays. And for me, it really, our focus has become much more on decision making than any other sort of detail. And it's really valuable. And what I go and look at, I really value the assist turnover ratio. It's just a metric that is old school and it really doesn't lie. If I look at you, Chris Oliver, as a player, and you got 10 assists and 32 turnovers, I'm thinking, all right, he could score, but the dude really can't play, because eventually you can take a guy like that out.
But coach, you changed your whole defense because I was killing you. Remember? You said they had to deny me. Now I'm turning.
I had to bring you down. I had to bring you down to earth a little bit.
Those would be the most fascinating stats from any game possible if I was doing that. Those two things. It's great. And yeah.
So that's it for us. And I want to look at my 5 starters, the guys that are playing for me. I know we'll have a good team if all 5 have a positive assist turnover ratio. Then I'll know, like, we got a good team. You can't really stop us.
So in terms of that, do you start the season with a bit of a structure for them? You said not necessarily sets, but are you giving them some type of spacing template or some different things from which these decisions and freedom evolve?
Yes. But I'm also, so we have a little bit of a plan based on who we think might be playing for us.
Mhm.
But then also the openness and the understanding that in all likelihood, this whole thing's going to change. We're going to get to the holiday break and we're going to have to revisit and see, is this working? Is this not working? Are there different guys playing now? Did we have injuries? We might have been playing through the post, but now we're not. So, but it really is as simple as like we just completely restructured our offensive spacing after Christmas. We've had like 5 practices with it, and it already looks better than anything we were doing prior. But it's nothing complicated. It's just a 5-out spacing instead of a 3-out 2-in spacing that we had been playing before, and then just a couple little movements and iterations off of it so that they know where each other is, but nothing complicated at all. So I think having the adaptability within just almost as simple as that: 3-out 2-in, 4-out 1-in, 5-out. Are you going to have your post trail or run to the rim? Who's taking the ball out of bounds? I think those are some of the like little simple nuances that we need to have. But then beyond that, it's fairly open.
Coach, I mean, just so much well thought out, concise. We can tell definitely why you've been successful in your coaching and with your program. And, just appreciate you joining us so much. But before you go, I just got to ask you, how are you approaching defending this thing?
Well, how I approached it probably didn't work because, here we are as we stand right now. We are still a work in progress, 17 games into this season following a national championship. Until you have done it, you don't know what to expect. And we have had some challenges this year for sure. First part of that was our schedule. We were very aggressive. I think we had the toughest schedule in the country through the first month. A couple things that you don't maybe prepare for, that maybe someone will win a championship this year and watch this and they can learn, because I wish I had known. First and foremost is we've always been an opponent that had a target on our back and people wanted to beat us. We've had enough success that people played their best against us. But let me tell you, the level of play of our opponents to start this year was incredible. Like we work incredibly hard at defending the 3-point line. You look at our numbers, we typically give up about 5 makes a game on average. And that's a really good number. And typically they're going to shoot, 30, 28, 32% against us. You look at our numbers to start this year, teams were shooting almost 40% from 3 against us. We weren't doing anything different. Dudes were hitting shots falling out of bounds to beat the national champions. I don't know what you do about that. It was incredible, and it still is. Some of the performances of teams against us that we've seen, really good teams, but also playing at incredibly high levels against us. So there's that, and then there's the potential for a national championship leading, like in this world, is our job as mentors to try to get them to understand that I probably didn't do a good enough job. When you get promoted in your job, when you get promoted in life, your responsibilities get harder, not easier. And that goes in all walks of life. And I needed to have done a better job this year preparing my team for that. I think we had some guys who returned who thought, we've won a national championship. Now things are going to get easier. Now I don't necessarily have to do all those things the way I did them before. I don't have to be coached as hard. I don't have to push myself in practice because I know what it takes in the games. I can worry a little bit more about my own performance rather than the team. Just things that these terrific young men had never shown before crept into the equation, that it was like an out-of-body experience. And I didn't foresee it, and I probably should have. But we've worked through it, and I'm excited about the remainder of the season because I think we've had enough conversations and we've gotten our butt whooped enough that, I think it's all starting to come back around to kind of be who we want to be in terms of our togetherness. But I tell you what, it has been a learning process for me as a leader for sure. I know for our guys it has. And just glad we got a shot here to try to get back into this dance and see what kind of noise we can make. But it just goes to show you, every team is different, every year is different. You need things to go your way. You need luck. You need great chemistry. You need to not have injuries. As you know, I'm not telling anything you don't know, Chris, but this has been a interesting, learning, growing year for me and for CNU basketball. And we've made it. We made it to this point. We're 13-4. We can't be too upset about that. And we got a chance now to, I think, really turn it up and try to make another run.
So much great advice throughout this podcast, but you maybe save some of the best for last, Coach. Thanks for sharing that introspection with us and, some guidance, I think, for, hopefully all of us as coaches that get to do what you've done and defend a national championship. That's pretty cool. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing the game.
Chris, thank you so much for having me.